first of all, I'd just like to know what you made of these results.
Britain forecasts Tamworth to be split 50-50, or 40% Conservative, 40% Labour. It didn't work out like that. It was a Labour gain with a majority of 5 points, overperforming what the polls were saying. Mid Bedfordshire, you know when the by-election was called, or rather even before then, when we knew Nadine Dorries was going to resign, and then she took God knows how long to resign. I was writing up the seat as, come on, look, Labour doesn't have much of a ground game here, nor do the Lib Dems. But you look at the voters, you know this is a countryside seat. The Lib Dems should be going for this type of place, okay? Because normally anything larger than X, Labour doesn't normally touch because they don't have a ground game. And they make a quite educated, cost-based assumption that they're not going to gain there. This is the election where they took a cheeky punt. And you're speaking to people who actually organised it. They treated it like that at the start. They thought, OK, let's give a go. Let's see what happens if we actually go out to these seats, these villages, these tiny towns. Mid Bedfordshire, its largest town is Flitwick, which is 20,000 people. That's nothing in a seat of 70, 80,000 people. That's really nothing. And what they did is they said, OK, let's have a go. Let's go out to these towns and the villages, and let's campaign in a sort of different way. And they did. Labour didn't run a stereotypically Labour campaign in Mid Bedfordshire, and they struck gold. It really is quite something surprising there. And what it shows this is that in some parts of the country, voters are just waiting to meet certain candidates or certain parties to then consider voting for them. Because if those candidates or parties don't campaign there, those people will never vote for those parties or candidates. And by and large, the Labour campaign's just been non-existent in these countryside parts. And what's happened as a consequence is the Labour vote has just been non-existent, and the Lib Dems have been allowed to clean up. Mid Bedfordshire, complete reversal of that. It is astonishing. And this is the takeaway you need to remember. Labour didn't need Tamworth or Mid Bedfordshire to get a majority. Labour didn't need Tamworth or Mid Bedfordshire to get 400 seats. Labour didn't need Tamworth or Mid Bedfordshire to get 420 seats or 430. By about 440, you start winning Tamworth. Mid Bedfordshire is closer to, I think, 500 seats. Okay, so these are really out of the realms of what Labour should reasonably be targeting at a general election. And what does that say? What does that say? That these fell so easily into the laps of the Labour Party. It illustrates Tory apathy on a scale that we have seen in the past, but normally rallies at a general election. But really, this is not a protest party winning by-elections. This isn't the Lib Dems winning by-elections. This isn't UKIP. It's the party of apparent government, Labour, winning the by-elections. That's what makes it so significant.
Conservative MPs and spokespeople today are trying to say our voters stayed at home, or some on the party's right are saying that they voted for reform in Tamworth rather than switching to Labour. What do you make of those claims?
Yeah, so I've heard it as well. Conservative MPs, they're waking up and they're sort of saying, well, look, this is midterm parliament. Our vote is staying at home. Come a general election, they will come out for us. And okay, look, let's take it on face value. That does normally happen. In normal, we've all heard of midterm parliament polling. In the middle of the 2010-15 years, when Ed Miliband was Labour leader, they were coming away with 10, 15, 20-point leads sometimes. A lot of us, when we were all thinking, yeah, Labour probably will win the next election because of that. But the fundamentals were different. The Tories still had the lead on the economy. Cameron still led Miliband on likeability. The fundamentals, were still very, very geared in favour of the Tories. This is not now. The idea that the governing party rallies their base for an election is predicated on the fact the governing party has something to rally with a good theme in mind. And right now they don't. So a bit of history. Normally, a governing party gets 10% more than it does in a midterm parliament. So let's say you're on 30% now. And what that means is, according to history, on average, you get 10% more. If you're on 30% now, what's 10% of 30%? 3 points. So if you're on 30% now, you'll probably end up with 33% come the next election. Right now, the Conservatives are on, I think it's 27%. What's 10% of that? Let's say 3 points as well. So if you assume history repeats itself, if you assume it's just going to be an average repeat of history, The Tories, who are polling 27% now, will probably end up on 30%. And Labour, currently on 44%, will end up on 41%. So if you assume voters rally back to the government like they have in the past, you're going to pretty much end up with Labour coming ahead with a 10, 11-point lead. Okay, that's probably the average. Now, will that happen? There's pretty good reason to not think that will happen. You need to bear in mind, how do Tory voters, how does that Tory base that's very apathetic right now feel about Keir Starmer and the Labour Party? Well, half of them are not bothered if Starmer wins the next election. A quarter of them actually want Starmer to win the next election. When they look at the policies the Tory party put about after conference, good opinion research here, ask Tory voters, do you think the Tories under Rishi Sunak have good policies? 45% said yes, 34% said no, which if that was a country, if that was the country at large, you would think, okay, the Tories are cruising to a decent win. But that's the Tory base. That's those that backed Boris Johnson's great Get Brexit Done in 2019. For your base to be that split, for half your base to not be bothered about the idea of a Labour landslide, for half your base, or thereabouts a third closer, to think you do not have good policies, these apathetic voters will not rally to you like history has shown in a general election. You're going to need to do a lot more than that. And that's why I say when Conservative MPs comfort themselves saying Mid-Beds and Tamworth is just the case of people staying at home. Yes, it is. A lot of this is down to Tory voters staying at home. Labour are netting support, absolutely. But don't bank on them coming out for you in a general election.
What does the Mid-Beds campaign, in terms of it being this three-way battle, tell us about future seats that might have similar dynamics in terms of the relationship between Labour and the Lib Dems? Yeah,
so I was sort of having a think about this. The Mid Bedfordshire by-election campaign between Labour and the Lib Dems, let's face it, was pretty nasty, wasn't it? It wasn't the nicest thing on the planet, and I think we're all getting the impression this morning that Labour and the Lib Dems are starting to get pally-pally again. The Lib Dems are sort of coming up with their tail between their legs saying, well, we won you the seat. We took enough Tory votes in villages to hand it to you, right? Yeah, you should be very grateful. I'm not sure if that's true. We don't really know. We don't know the splits by village. But it is something to consider. Yeah, there are enough seats, right? When it comes to a general election, is Labour going to go out and target everywhere? Like the Lib Dems did in 2019 with Jo Swinson proclaiming herself as new Prime Minister and putting resources into seats like Rushcliffe or Ken Clarke's old seat. Okay, is Labour going to do that? A bit of me doesn't think so, because this is a by-election. This is where you have, in principle, an infinite budget to mess around with. You're not going to have that in a general election. You're going to want to target your resources effectively. I think, though, if you rewind yourself back to the last election, there's about a few seats, 1, 2, 3, maybe half a dozen, where the Lib Dems were gunning in areas where Labour were gunning. So we're talking Finchley and Golders Green, we're talking Wimbledon, we're talking cities of London and Westminster, and I think Hammersmith as well. It was quite split. Don't think it's going to stay that way. I think a lot of that was Remainers going from Labour to Lib Dems. I think that's going to sort of die away. And I think the Lib Dems know that. I don't think that there are that many seats in which Labour and the Lib Dems will be competing or arguing over who should target. I think, to be honest with you, there's about 60 to 70 seats probably the Lib Dems can put in some good resources into, and they'll probably win about 40 plus of them with a good amount of tactical voting. And of those seats, I think almost all of them don't have any sizable Labour representation at all. I'm trying to think them up, and maybe there's some in Dorset, some in Cornwall in the West Country. Maybe I think what Mid Bedfordshire shows is Labour going for a cheeky punt, and the Lib Dems being very unhappy about that. And I don't think that's going to happen at a general election.
Yes. Well, it's interesting because you mentioned the fact that in by-elections, things are very different because parties target resources and time at these seats in a way that they couldn't do in a general election for every seat that they might be in a chance with winning. So it's the perennial question, but how much can we actually take from by-election wins like this?
Don't know. This is a hard thing, because I said at the start, or when we were talking about the Tory MPs, comforting themselves with saying, oh, it's just apathetic voters staying at home, they'll rally back. History shows some of them do. Some of them do. And this is the extreme instance, writ large, of the Tory base being apathetic and a good chunk actually going to Labour. Just bear this in mind. 40% of those that voted Tory last time say they're going to stick with the Tories. Around about 20 to 30% say they're unsure or won't vote. They're the apathetic bunch that the Tories need to squeeze. You have about 10 to 15 and sometimes as high as 20% saying they're voting Labour, and then you have about 5% going Lib Dem, maybe 10% going Reform. I think the idea that it's just going to get squeezed and squeezed and squeezed as history isn't the guarantee it was, because half the Tory base aren't bothered by the idea about Starmer winning. Half the Tory base don't think Rishi Sunak has good policies, and more voters increasingly trust Labour to run the economy. You know, no drama with Keir Starmer is a meme, but it actually is what a lot of voters feel. This is not a dramatic leader. This isn't a man who's going to be a radical redistributionist that you need to fear for, which might annoy certain, elements of the left of the party and some of us in the media. But when you're trying to stop Tories or trying to turn off Tories from coming out against you, you're winning. You're winning. And I really do think Tory MPs comforting themselves I would say you would probably be you'd be more right if the Labour leader was hated by his opponents, and by opponents I mean Tory opponents, but that's not the case here. I actually think the fact Keir Starmer has been, in the eyes of some of us, a bit of a wet wipe, or just a non-entity, is now beginning to help him, because voters aren't really caring if he wins now, and what that means is Tory apathy will probably stay that way. And here's another thing as well I expect. Last election turnout went down a little bit, but it was high. It was pretty good. I expect turnout might fall a fair bit at the next election, because Tory voters are just staying at home. Remember the 1997 election with Tony Blair, massive landslide, but a lot of that was Tories just content with the idea of a Labour landslide. Let him have a go. And that's what they did.
Thanks so much for watching. We'd love to know what you think. Please make sure you leave your comments below. And if you enjoyed watching this podcast, you can watch more of our videos on our YouTube channel. And don't forget to like and subscribe.